in your first draft, for sure, start off with the main character dying. It doesn't matter. Just start off in something that's going to make me stop doing everything else and just gotta read that. And then scale it back so that it lines up with the kind of story you're trying to tell. But don't be afraid to shock people, or don't be afraid to grab people by the neck and say, pay attention to me. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Fix Stories. I am your host, one of your hosts, Jared, and I'm here with my other co-host.
Hi, I'm Jaylon.
And today we have another guest. This is Rose, and today we're talking about her story, and we'll let her get a chance to kind of give us the background. She said she's checked out our show before, so she has a general idea of how this thing goes. So that'll make things a lot easier for all of us, I think. So, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the book, the story that you're writing. Give us your elevator pitch, the why you wrote this, who you wrote it for, all of that.
Well, I've always loved writing, but it was mostly all short stories before I began to collect my dreams and nightmares in a journal. And then one day I was reading over them and I just decided to make a story out of all the chaos. I wrote 10 books because I just couldn't stop for some reason. And now I have all these drafts and my Google Docs, and it's just, and I published it for myself as well.
Okay, nice.
That's awesome.
Okay. And so if you had to summarize it and I know this is like one of the hardest things to do for writers. I know it's hard for me. Whenever someone's like, tell me what your book's about, and I'm like, well, you see, there's 989 characters, and I'm going to tell you about all of them. But tell us in a few sentences, if you can, what's the story about? What's the genre? All of that jazz.
I'd definitely say it's fantasy with a coming of age sort of dark twist. The story's about a young girl who's just moved into Snoqualmie, Washington with her mother, and she's discovering that she has these monstrous urges that she can't quite understand or control.
I really think that it's fun that your story came from your dreams and your nightmares. And I think that that's going to come into play with one of the notes that I wrote down that I'm going to share later about. I could see underneath this story, there is something very core to what we all struggle with as humans. And one of the things that it's not very explored in fiction, but it's something that should be explored in fiction and stories because it helps us to ask really important questions of ourselves.
Very true.
Glad you said that. That's one of the messages, I don't know if you're exactly talking about it, but the message is dealing with that darker self, So I'm glad you said that.
I'm always a big fan of stories that are, if you've watched any of our podcasts, you know that I love dark characters. I like tragic characters. I like characters that are, that either start out good and then become really, really bad, or somewhere in between. I like darkness for my dark soul. So I was excited about that, knowing that that's where this was going, or the idea of it was what I was really excited about. So yeah, so we'll get started with the usual. So first things first, we talk about what's working, what's not working, and then of course, the thematic resonance and all of that jazz that comes along with it. I, as usual, wrote down my notes so that they would make sense as opposed to the ramblings that I like to go on.
Down notes, and I still ramble, so.
Fair. Okay, so Jaylon, would you like to start us off with what's working?
Sure. So I will start with the first thing that jumped out to me as really intriguing about this story. Again, we only read the first 10K words. I skipped ahead and read a little bit more just because I was curious about where it was going. But immediately what stood out to me and kept me wanting to read was the sense of mystery and foreboding that you kind of wove into there. From the beginning, from the get-go, we know that something's off, but we don't know exactly what it is. So for the main character, for Serena, from her not looking like her mother to her daily vitamins that she talks about, her pills, to her mother's very palpable fear for her, to all of her physical ailments, you know that something is off, but because you don't know what it is, you're kind of just given glimpses of that portal into the inevitable. And I think that that's key to what kept me reading and what will keep other readers reading as well. Another thing that I noticed was that your writing style flows very well. Your descriptions were great. I could easily visualize everything from the characters, physically how they looked, to how their feelings felt, to the setting of the story. It all came very alive for me, and the prose just flowed really well. So those are incredible marks of a very talented writer. Very good job.
Thank you.
The other thing I liked, I wrote down in my notes, you show the quiet parts well, and that gives depth to the characters. So, for example, the line, beneath her cheerful demeanor, I also sensed a subtle undercurrent of nervousness. Her fingers occasionally twitched on the steering wheel, and her brows would furrow in momentary contemplation. That kind of, there's little quirks to these characters that gives away what they're feeling. You give a very concrete description to these abstract feelings, and that really immerses your readers into the story with these characters. It brings them alive. Another cool description that you used was, lying to my mother made me want to scrape the flesh off my tongue with a cheese grater. That very much felt like something that I could visualize. I could understand that feeling because it was described with a unique metaphor. Another great kind of like the mystery foreboding thing, not revealing what happened in Texas, but revealing how it was a big deal, or referencing how it was a big deal, is a very great technique for showing that there's something deeper to these characters, but also immersing us in their story, because you're not info dumping. You're not like expounding on every single detail of your character's past, but you're showing that this was a key turning point. And not only am I hooked, I want to keep reading, but I'm also really intrigued about what it could be. And it just feels like a very natural way to tie in these details instead of just info dumping. So again, another mark of a really talented writer. And those different storytelling techniques that I noticed are key to what makes your story very powerful. It's a way of delivery that people really latch onto and makes them want to read your story and learn the important things that you have to say. So very good job there.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
The other thing, let me decide what I want to go with, because I wrote down a lot of different quotes that I read that I really liked. I think this is kind of going into like something else that I feel like isn't explored enough in a lot of stories, but is very important for stories to explore, is the line where Serena is meeting all these new friends, but she feels a little bit of nervousness or trauma, or in the book, it was uncomfortableness with how these relationships were developing. You wrote, it reminded me of a past friendship where I was expected to offer things because of what they gave me. It was difficult to separate my memory of this past friendship from reverie. A part of me wanted to see her as having no twisted intentions, and another part wanted to run away before she could reveal them. That was very relatable to me as a human walking through this life. And I think that it's going to be very relatable to other humans who read your story and it ends up meaning a lot to them. Another note was the scene when Serena gets sick from the energy drink in Mr. Murray's class. The way you write Serena's pain, as it kind of becomes its own world of unique metaphors, like her hearing different things, tasting different things, smelling different scents. Those little metaphors and quirks are very unique to her character. Again, another thing that makes her come alive as a character, but it also allows us to escape into her world. And you kind of make us go down that portal into realizing there is something deeper. So again, another way that you immerse your readers in the feelings and the way that this character is real, also glimpsing a portal into a deeper world within your story. So that's the sum up of all the different things that jumped out to me as working really well, that I really loved about this story, and it makes me excited to see how the rest of your writing and your story will unfold and what is in this deeper world that you're hinting at.
I'm glad you worded it like that, because when I was writing that scene, I want it to be like Alice in Wonderland kind of theme, where you've gone down a rabbit hole and you have no idea what's happening.
I definitely got that. I definitely got that from the scene.
I agree with the points that Jaylon made. I will say this for transparency's sake. The level of distance that I have from this is a little bit further, because I read it on Tuesday and I made my notes and I did that. And then life happened. So I was emotionally invested on Tuesday, and then my emotions decided to be invested in other things. In between there, and so now here we are, and I'm focused on it. So my level of emotional attachment to it, I think, is not there as much, which I think is a good thing. It'll be a good thing in this conversation. So I will say that the first thing that stood out to me um, was the prose is very solid. You showed that you know how to write on a technical level very well. So there was a lot of control. You have a solid grasp on the mastery of the language, pacing within the sentences, and you understand how to connect with emotion, which is really, really hard to do for a lot of people. Sometimes you'll read something and it'll read like it's in a newspaper. So it's kind of like there's no emotional soul to it. It's just kind of this person is reporting on what's happening, but they're not living through it, if that makes sense, or they're not at least feeling their way through it. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a writer who likes to feel his way through his work, but I do think that you can always tell when a writer did put their heart and soul into something, as opposed to when somebody was just kind of like, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And so you have, like I said, you have a very solid understanding of that. A lot of people don't really have that foundation, and I think that kind of shows in a lot of stuff that exists that's been published, let alone that's been submitted to us. So that's the first thing that really stood out to me. The other thing was the emotional core. The thing that I really, really liked was the mother-daughter dynamic. I think that any story that has a relationship I mean, all stories have relationships, but like parental relationships are always really interesting to me, especially when it's not used as what's the word I'm thinking of, a ploy or some kind of like prop relationship. And you kind of get that a lot in stories where it's like the parents exist and the parents are there, but like, you know, they're not really their parents, they're kind of just there. This is a story where it's like there's a part in there where it's like they're telling each other that they love, well, the mother's telling her daughter that she loves her, and the way that she tells her over and over again felt so real to me. 'Cause I remember being a teenager and my mom telling me again and again that she loved me, and that feeling of like, okay, I love you too, but I gotta go type of thing. And that's the kind of stuff that I really love in a story, because it's like Jaylon said, it really is. It's one of those things you can relate to as a real life human walking around, like Jaylon said. And I think that those moments where I can see myself in it are always really, really, really good. I felt that the dynamic was grounded. There was a tenderness to it. I also felt that there was kind of a layered bit of tension. As I said, it felt like a realistic mother-daughter relationship. I'm not a daughter, so I don't know, but I mean, it felt like a realistic child and parent relationship, of being the constant overbearing nature of your mom and you trying to sort of figure that out, of how to like navigate that, not wanting to upset her, not wanting to make her feel bad, kind of taking on the responsibility of your parents' feelings, which within itself is always kind of it's a weird thing. As a human being, it's kind of your responsibility to be responsible with other people's feelings. However, when you're a child or a teenager, it's really, really weird when you feel like you have to be responsible for your parents' feelings and that kind of thing. So, and I know that like we've all been young before, we've all been teenagers, so we all know that there are those moments where we don't necessarily care, but we do care, but we don't show that we care, that we hurt our parents' feelings. And so the fact that Serena seems to genuinely care about her mom's feelings, even though she's kind of she's got her own stuff going on and she's just kind of trying to feel her way through life. I think that all comes through really, really well. I think the anxiety of it all, the protectiveness of it all, the guilt, it's just a relationship that felt true. And I liked that. And I feel like I've been doing a lot of reading lately, and I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I've read where I feel like the relationships, I sit back and I say, this relationship doesn't feel honest to me. I don't feel like these are how people would really act. Yes, there are dragons. Yes, there's stuff, blowing up and people have swords and they're running around with them. But still, I don't think that on a human level, this is how somebody would respond. In this particular situation, I did feel like this is real. This was like almost slice of life kind of to me. and I liked that. The other thing I would say is that there are definitely some moments where it feels like Serena was craving warmth and kind of connection. I also got to say though, the thing with the pills and the reaction to them, I really liked that. I liked that a lot. As a person who was as a kid had to take his ADHD meds and his mental health medications and things like that, and absolutely hated them and felt like, you know, my doctor, my mother, and anybody else who was an adult was trying to poison me 9 times out of 10. The pure repulsed nature that she had about it all felt really real to me. So I feel like, I think what you did best, what's working the best here, is the level of realism to the whole thing. It all feels like a real situation, real people dealing with real things. That's what stands out the most to me as far as what's working.
That's great, because that's what I really wanted to do for the beginning before I threw everyone into the chaos, you know? So I'm glad I could do that.
So yeah, let's jump into what can use a little work. Jaylon, you can take it away.
So we'll give our usual disclaimer that editors are here as story partners. Having your baby torn apart and critiqued is very difficult. It hurts a lot. So big props to you for being so brave to come to the session and let us do that. But our word isn't God. So we may give suggestions, but story is subjective. Different people have different perspectives. Different people have different tastes. And what we're doing here is just collaborating and brainstorming together how we can make it better. We're not just trying to tell you what you need to do. So that's our usual disclaimer of we are your story partners. We are not editors who are trying to change your voice or change what you're actually trying to say with your story. So the first thing that I'll jump into, and this is again because I jumped ahead and read more than we said we would for this audit, I feel like the point of no return has to happen a lot earlier. So you do a really great job of setting the world of your normal world for your characters, but the point where Serena's humanity breaks and she meets Lorenzo is really where your story starts. That's really where the core of what you're trying to say in your story starts getting explored. So I think that point has to happen a lot sooner in order for your readers to become even more invested. Because I was invested in Serena as a character. I was pulled in by these different hints that there's something more going on, but a lot of readers are impatient, and some readers won't stay reading if you don't jump into a little bit more of what's the core theme of your story. And if you give those hints a little bit sooner, if you let that happen a little bit sooner, then you'll have more chance of your readers really getting behind what you're trying to say even more.
My first draft was exactly like that. It was just like the murder scene, but I felt like I was info dumping too much, and I just felt like it wasn't reading well to me. But I get where you're coming from. I definitely do.
I think there's definitely a balance, because I did really like, again, the normal world, the setting there. It flows very well, and I think that you wrote it really well, and it is very important to the story in helping your readers understand your character before you, like you said, throw them into the chaos, because that's what we do best as writers. We throw people into the chaos. So I think that for the effect of the chaos to feel chaotic, setting something up is more like this is more the normal world before the chaos happens. It has better dramatic effect. A couple questions you can ask to help you know what can be cut out to make sure that you're still keeping your plot line tight is which characters that you introduce or which scenes that you write show core themes that are going to be developed later. So if you have a scene, like for example, the diner scene with Lou, and that scene, I picked up on like some tension between Lou and Sarah, and I was curious, like, is that going to get developed later? Is this a character that's going to be important later, or a relationship that's going to be important later? And if it is, then definitely keep it, because it has a purpose for this story, for developing your theme and having that full discussion. But if it isn't something that gets developed later, maybe you can skip that scene and instead just focus on the scenes where either who Serena is as a character or the relationships that are going to help develop your core theme would be better scenes to focus on. Does that make sense?
Yes, but they are like all big, like they all come back. Even Connie, the waitress, she even comes back. So every character you meet is important to the story.
There you go. Then definitely keep that. And if you need to like maybe just speed up your narration, you could also do that. There's different ways to play with it. And this suggestion, again, it isn't something that like you take as law, because as the writer, you intrinsically know what's best for your story. You know the best way to tell your story. And if like we go through a brainstorm like this and there's not really a great way for a suggestion to be implemented while your story still stays your own and you stay true to what your gut is telling you as the writer, then you go with what your gut's telling you. And it doesn't have to be like a dramatic fix either. It can be like, maybe cut out 100 words, like something very, very small. But the fact that all those relationships do come up later is awesome, because that answered another question that I had with like all the friends or all the people that Serena starts meeting at school. I really loved the tone that you gave her friends. I really loved, how do you pronounce the star? I'll use the term that Serena used, but the starry girl's name.
Adeline.
I really loved that character. I loved the way that you described her. It just immediately like gave me a beautiful picture and a clear picture of who this character was, to have her described as a stellar cosmic, like reminding Serena of space. I absolutely loved that. And I think that leaning into that uniqueness for each of your characters, making sure that they have distinct tones, just like you gave Serena distinct quirks that set her apart as a character, giving each of your side characters those same individual quirks that help them stay cemented in your reader's mind, so that when you do circle back around to them later, it's like a big mind-blowing thing, and it's not just I totally forgot about this character.
Yeah, I was always scared to like have someone forget about this character. I mean, I want people to forget Connie for other reasons, but not her friends or the bullies or Lou or Evelyn.
Yeah, for sure. I think that making sure that you make each character's voice distinct so that they don't blend into each other is what's going to make them stand out in your readers' minds and help them keep a thread of connection to them by the part of the story where they come back into play. One small note, this is really small, really nitpicky, but it was something that like, because of the kind of reader I am, I got hung up on it. I didn't realize that the mattresses came from Evelyn. And so in my mind, like as we're going through the scene where they're unpacking the car, I was like, how did they fit 2 mattresses and their moving boxes in their minivan when they still had a back seat? Because it was mentioned that Serena was sitting in the back seat. And then like it was explained in the next scene that Evelyn was the one who gave them the mattresses. But little details like that, again, depending on the reader you have, they might get hung up on it. I'm weird, so.
Trying to understand. So you would prefer that detail in the beginning?
I would just make sure that you mention that the mattresses were unloaded from Evelyn's truck, as opposed to like they unloaded the mattresses. Because again, in my mind, I just went to how'd they fit all that in the minivan? So again, very little nitpicky things, but I mentioned them because you have everything else so solid. There's not really anything else to mention. The only other thing, this is more of a bigger overarching thing. Well, okay, I'll go with the one more nitpicky thing. There were only once or twice that you stepped out of your first person limited point of view and started describing something as if someone else besides Serena was describing it. And again, like that's something that happens to the best of us. That's something that happens to me. And then I need someone else to tell me, hey, make sure you remember whose perspective you're writing from, because point of view is annoying in writing. But again, just a little thing that your editor will pick up for you. You don't have to stress about those things because you have the bigger picture that you're giving life to, and that's your job as the writer. So one more thing I'll mention, and this can be another one of like, let's brainstorm together, and maybe you'll have more information that you can give me that can help me understand better what you're trying to say. But speaking of consistency with perspective, I would love it if I had a better or more clear understanding about whether Serena wants to go to school or wants to stay home in her safe comfort zone. I really loved the little details that you dropped where like the car was her comfort zone. She wanted to stay in the comfort of her car, or she's been homeschooled for so long. So as someone who is homeschooled, my home is my comfort zone, and being surrounded by overwhelming people who talk a lot is a lot for my brain. And it tires me out like it did for Serena.
Yeah.
So that nervousness that she has makes a lot of sense. And there is something to say for the duality of humanity. Like, oftentimes we are not clear cut. We can want more than one thing at the same time, but you just have to make sure that you explain that duality in a way that makes sense within a story that you only have a limited amount of time with. So, for example, you could say, maybe she is nervous about going to school, but she wants the normalcy that comes on the other side of going to school. And so that's what she wants. So it could just be like a slight tweak in phrasing or an extra sentence somewhere that clarifies, like, it's not her being wishy-washy wanting both these things at the same time. It's her wanting both these things at the same time, and it makes sense. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does. I mean, I tried to do that when she was talking about how she would only want to make friends for her mother's sake.
Yep.
Because, like, she wants to seem normal for her mother because she doesn't want to disrupt her mother's life, but at the same time, she's overwhelmed by all these things, like just the talkative people, the new drinks, and the bullies,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, like, I think that you did touch on those things really well. So instead of like just hinting at it, you can really like accelerate on it and you can commit entirely to it. Just different threads of connections that you can connect even more clearly so that readers don't have the chance of questioning what your character is actually trying to say.
Is it okay that I did that in, like, other chapters? Like, when a character asks her a question if she wanted to be here, she touches more on that subject, or she explains it in more depth. Is that okay, or do you prefer it in, like, the earlier chapters?
That's a good question, and I think that the key is, depending on the type of reader you talk to, different people are going to prefer different things.
Oh,
It can be something where it's like kind of a mystery, and then you hook readers by explaining more later, and they know that more is going to be explained later, so they keep reading for that. But it can also be something that you say a little bit more up front, then your readers understand better how to get behind this character. Because when you're talking about like what a character wants, that's the main drive for your plot. So being really clear about what your character wants, I think, is a big cornerstone that will give you even more acceleration along your plot line. So for me personally, I would like it up front because, again, it has to do with what your character wants. And I feel like that's something that needs to be very clear from the get-go in every single scene. But I'm curious, because that's the end of my notes. So I'm curious if we can move right into Jared, if you have any brainstorms on this, any thoughts about this.
Okay, yeah, maybe. I might. But I will go through my notes, and if it helps make it a little clearer, then awesome. I also have to I also have to do kind of a preface as well. Jalen covered the whole, you're really, really brave for doing this. We say this to everybody that comes on here because it's not easy to have somebody do that, and I stand by that. I also want to preface this by saying that when Jaylon refers to the idea of different types of readers, one thing that is, I think, also known about me if you've watched the podcast is my background is more filmmaking and screenwriting before I started really diving into prose. And so in screenwriting, the key for screenwriting is you have like 5 to 10 pages to really hook your reader, whoever's reading it or whatever. Or when you watch a movie, you have 5 or 10 minutes before people are like, okay. And even now, like in the TikTok era, it's like even less before people are like, okay, this isn't for me. So when I read, I always approach it like I'm watching a movie. And if the book doesn't grab me and say, this is what I'm about, this is what I want, this is what my protagonist wants, this is what's not necessarily this is what's going to happen, but I promise that some scary, crazy, or madness type shit is going to happen. You just got to stick with me, and I'll make that happen. If you can manage to do that, then usually we'll be okay. So I say all of that to say that all of my opinions, all of my point of view come from that perspective. Okay? So as long as we're all on the same page, I will go through what I thought needed a little bit of work. So one of the things that I think Jaylon touched on a little bit is the pace of the story, in the sense of the speed of how things are going. To me, it felt slow. It felt like there was a lot of quiet tension, as opposed to like, okay, so let's say there's a story, and I'll give you an example so you see what I mean. Let's say you start off a story where you have two people in a bank, right? Or not a bank, but like in a diner. Perfect example, now that I'm thinking of it, Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but at the beginning of Pulp Fiction, there's a scene where it starts off with these two people in a diner, and they're having this conversation. And they're going back and forth, and the conversation seems rather mundane. It seems like a really mundane conversation, but the way that the conversation escalates, it just explodes into this robbery. But at first, it's this very quiet tension. So when I say that this doesn't feel like that, not necessarily that it has to feel like Pulp Fiction, but in the sense that it doesn't feel like something is boiling under the surface. To me, it just kind of felt like a slice of life to me. We start off with we're opening up with a move. And then we're unpacking. There's a yard sale. None of those things are bad on their own, but they all feel like they're just lateral movement. Nothing is changing. There's no real tension. I mean, and I think, again, Jaylon may have read further ahead than I did, so there may be things that are coming up that I don't know. Some of these characters and some of the stuff that's happening, like you said, that there's a reason. All these characters exist for a reason. They come back. They're going to have a bigger part. And so this is just my ADHD brain saying, I want to know what's going on. Who are these people? Because on the surface, it kind of just looks like this is a teenage girl who doesn't really want to deal with people, who's going to a new home, and she's homeschooled, and everybody around her kind of gets on her nerves a little bit, and she's just trying to figure it out. And that's kind of how it is. And so, which is a totally fine book. If the book is meant to be a literary fiction book, I would totally be in for that, because that's the we talk about this all the time. The promise that you make to your reader when you tell them what the genre of your story is. So when I tell you that my genre is a horror book, I promise that I'm going to terrify you. That's what I'm promising you. When I tell you that I'm going to give you a literary fiction, that means I'm going to most likely make you cry and break you emotionally. So if it's dark fantasy, it's dark fantasy romance, I'm expecting there to be some creepiness, unfortunately, a little bit of the hot guy or hot girl type, whatever. These are the things that I'm expecting to happen. This felt more like I was reading a literary fiction book. The thing that I think would make this stronger is, one, I would cut the monotony, either cut it or add stuff to it to make it more interesting. So if they're moving, cool. I don't know in the first 10,000 words, you don't really get an idea of what the supernatural dark fantasy elements are gonna be, as far as like if there's a monster or there's a god or there's a whatever type of thing. You don't really meet any of those people, or at least not that I know of. Nobody seems like they fit into that category yet. So if we could introduce some of those elements, whether it be something peripheral, in the sense of something that's on the side, when they're moving, she sees something out the window that kind of lets me know, okay, this isn't a normal world that we're living in. There's some creepy shit that's about to go down, and I'm kind of here for that. Doing that might be a good way to do it.
I was trying to do that more internal, like the way her stomach hurts, or the way she physically feels pain when her mother is upset about something, like, or the way she drools over reverie. I was trying to do that, like, this isn't normal.
Right. Okay, I get that.
And I did pick up on that too.
And I did too. I picked up on it. I picked up what you were putting down.
You just want more, like, supernatural, like, creepy stuff, right?
I want there to be a solid sign of what kind of world we are living in and the tone that we're trying to set. Because in a dark fantasy, it really is usually a darker world. For instance, and this is probably not the greatest example, but it's the only one that I can think of off the top of my head. So, for instance, The Vampire Diaries. Now, The Vampire Diaries, the TV show, let's not talk about Let's not talk about the
Book.
books
Yeah,
because
I
I'll get
don't want to
upset.
talk about those books.
I'm going to get upset. The TV show, for instance, if you've ever seen the pilot, you know that like the first thing that you see is this couple that's driving and they're, coming back from a concert. It seems like like a mundane conversation, but then the fog rolls in and then suddenly the hit something and then it becomes kind of scary and it immediately tells us this is not a regular CW drama where people are going to argue. This is not One Tree Hill. This is not one of those things. This is going to be kind of scary. And I want to feel that. When I read your story, I want to know, it doesn't necessarily have to be with Serena. If you want to add a prologue, you can do that. If you want to do something where Serena herself is experiencing things. So obviously she's different, correct? There's
Mhm.
something different about her.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and is she familiar with what's wrong with her? Just like,
Well, the pills are meant to subside like those effects. It's not your typical medication is what I'm trying to put out there. I want it to be like there's a sense of magic there. There's a sense of secrets that her mother is hiding and just, all that mystery. So she doesn't really know everything. That's why she has you didn't read the murder scene, right? That's why she has like this whole like breakdown and like panic attack sort of when she gets to that. Like she's like, what the hell is wrong with me kind of thing.
Okay.
If this helps to clarify kind of what Jared is saying and also like some more validation that your instinct as a writer is correct, because the contrast between like this is the normal world, like Jared is saying, like the slice of life, and that contrast with this very dark thing that's going on that she's going to have to confront about herself, and the shock of that is really good. So definitely keep that contrast, but just give a little bit something a little bit sooner that, again, lets people know what they're in for and hooks them to be, this is a story that I really have to pay attention to.
Would you suggest that, like, because my first draft was just the murder scene and then a bunch of info dumping, to be honest, but I was thinking about putting that, just a little clippet of the murder scene, and then you go to removing, but I don't know, like, if that would seem like a big jump or not.
That is perfect.
Really?
And I will tell you why that's perfect. I think whenever I envision a story, whenever I'm writing a story, the thing that I try to do from the beginning is punch my reader in the face as fast as I possibly can. So if you start off with something that's crazy, I'm working on something right now where the first chapter is one character is killing their dad. That's the opening of the story. There's no apology for it. There's no building up whether or not we should like this character or not. It's no, this is what's happening. This is the world that we're living in. It's okay to throw us into the deep end with a character, put us in a situation that gets us asking questions, the right questions, not like why the fuck am I reading this, but more like what's going to happen? Why do what's happening next? That's what you want to do. So having the murder first puts us in a situation where even if you put it like the first chapter is the murder scene, whether it's, again, I didn't read the murder scene, so I don't know. So I'm just going to give you a hypothetical murder scene and then you can take it for what you want. But like if you have a scene where like we open up with your main character on the floor, blood surrounding her, in blood, has no idea what the hell is going on or whatever, and then in kind of working through all of those emotions of like what's happening, and that's your first chapter right there, and then you just end it. No, there's no rules for how long your chapters have to be. You can have a chapter that I literally read a book the other day where a chapter was like one sentence and that was it. So you can literally start that way and then jump us to she's it's the now and the then. So you jump from that murder to now she's moving. So like it's like, or after and before. So we can say the name of the chapter could be before if you want it to be. And so now it's like, okay, well, what the hell happened to lead her to doing this murder? Did she kill this person? Was she an accomplice? Was she a witness? And now I'm asking all these questions and now I want to stick with it and read it till I find out. So yeah, I don't think that's a horrible idea at all.
Yeah, that's exactly what a prologue is for. It's to give your reader a hint of, we're going to start out in your ordinary world. We're going to show you what this character's ordinary life is like, but we're also going to go somewhere else later. Another suggestion, if you feel like that's too jarring for the tone that you are trying to set, is you could just start with your opening sentence instead of it being like, what I remember most is the move, you can say like, all of my nightmares about the murder start with the move. So even just something like in a single sentence that hints that something else is going to happen, something else has happened, that could be like
I like that.
another
That is
way.
a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do not have to be like me, and you don't have to just, put people in a chokehold the moment that they meet you. It's totally fine to be subtle about, you're crazy if you want to. So yeah, starting just having a sentence, like she said, the kind of the thing that I remember most before the murder was this. That's enough to make me kind of say, okay, wait a minute. Did you say murder? I need to I'm going to stick with this and figure out what murder. Did I miss something? Okay, now I have to kind of see it. So, I mean, either way totally works. And I think it also really just depends on the kind of reader you are dealing with.
Stay true to your tone, your
vision.
gut as the writer.
Right.
Because that's going to dictate who your reader is, not whoever picks up your book. It's who you want to read your book.
I wanted to ask if you picked up on I wanted to put, when she talks about what she remembers most, I wanted to know if you felt like she was a trustworthy narrator.
Ooh, that's a very good question. I like this question. That immediately made me think that she was a trustworthy narrator. It did make me I liked that opening, but I wanted the opening sentence to be a little bit stronger, to be like fully say what you were trying to say. So like add something else about, instead of just the I remember and then, the wavy edit scene, you have like she's actually telling a story that has traumatized her. Why is she remembering this, I guess? So like something that says she's not just remembering a random move, because I trust her as a narrator, but I didn't understand why some of these details made such an impact on her, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, and I'm definitely going to use that murder putting in there, because
Okay.
I think that would really help, especially get more audience, because I love hearing what people have to say. I posted my book on Wattpad, and I just love how readers engage on theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what this is all about. Like, it's really just giving writers a platform to share their story and get some of that, the gut reactions from people who read it. Because a story means a lot to the person who writes it. I think stories first speak to you, and the stronger that they speak to you, the stronger that they can speak to the readers that they're meant to find. So that's why I say so much, like, as an editor myself, I put so much stock in writers trusting their instincts, because I think that your instincts know exactly how the story needs to be told in order to touch the people that it needs to touch the most. So the tone that you're trying to set, the tone that resonates with you, it might not be the tone that, say, resonates with Jared. It might not be the tone that resonates with someone else. But yeah, hearing like how people see your story is super fun, because we all have different perspectives. We all have different lenses that we look through from our past life experiences that inform our perspective. So yeah, I totally get that. As both a writer and an editor, I relate to how exciting that is. And I think it's awesome that you are sharing these stories, because the real power in stories is not only when we tell them to ourselves, but then when we share them with others. And it helps others be able to connect to the human experience that someone else besides them has lived, and also fragments of giving voice to the human experiences that they have lived as well.
Yeah, my stance is definitely, I think that you do have to write the book you want to write, but I also think you have to remember that it depends on what your goals are. So, I mean, if you simply want to say, I wrote a book and I finished it and I got to the finish line, and that is valid, and that is more than 99% of most people will do. Most people talk about, I'm going to write a book one day, and they never do. So if your goal is just, I want to say that I wrote a thing that was in my head and I wanted to get it out and share it with people I care about, totally fine. If you want to be like a bestseller and you want to do all of that, it's a little bit different. There's a difference in the approach that you have to take. You still have to tell your story the way that you want to tell it, because that's number one. Always be true to the vision. But you also have to remember the genre that you're writing for, and that the people who will buy it are expecting a very specific thing. Now, There have been plenty of cases where, like, you know, people have broken out in a genre that has very specific rules, and they broke all the rules and people loved it. So go for it. Give it a shot. You never know what's going to happen. I'm only giving my perspective from, as I said, as a person who reads very specific types of books and has a very specific brain that tolerates quiet for only so long. I have a very different perspective than some people who are like, you know, listen, I will read a slow burn 900-page book and have no problem. I will die if I do that. So this is totally from my perspective. All that being said, as I stand by the fact that your ability, your mastery of craft is fantastic. And so yeah, I just think that the first thing I would work on would just be about where we start things or how we start things. So if that's, like I said, if it's just a sentence that kind of throws us in the middle of things, awesome. Or if you really want to give it a shot, and you know what, there's no rule that says you can't start with the murder. You know, create a draft that's just that way, give that to your beta readers and say, hey, look, here's how I started it this way, here's how I started it this way, which one grabs you more. Based off that feedback, then you can drive it forward. But I believe I said it on another episode that we don't live in the days of stone tablets anymore. You know, you can always edit it. You can always go back and fix it or tweak it or change it to see what works better. So yeah, give it a shot and see if there was any part of you that thought starting with the murder was a good instinct. That may be a reason why that's happening. Just see how it flows and see where it goes from there. The second thing that stuck with me was the genre itself. And this kind of goes into what I was saying before, was when I first read it, because I read it twice, and the first time I read it, I didn't read the Let's Fix Stories form that you submitted. I didn't want to read anything. I always try to approach the work as if I found your book on a coffee table and I just wanted to pick it up and see what it was about. I don't want to read the back. I don't want to know it. I just want to know if it grabs me flat out. So I did it that way first. And so when I first read it, I thought this was okay, that this is literary fiction. And if it is, I like it. I'm here. I'm in support of this story. I'm going to get emotionally gutted. I feel it already. And I'm okay with that. I like that. I'm sick like that. But then I went back and read the form, and then I was like, oh, this is dark fantasy. And I was like, okay, I didn't get that feeling when I was reading it. It didn't immediately jump out to me that that's what this was. Like I said, I did start to pick up on it when I thought back on it, when those things were like, you see it when you watch something or read something and then you read it again and with more context, and you're like, oh, those little things that were like, why is she pointing out that she's salivating like that in a literary fiction? That's a little weird. But then I was like, oh no, this is dark fantasy, so that makes sense now. So those little things those little signposts that you put in were fantastic. I think do more of that. More signs, more tells that tell me what kind of genre I am reading. Whether it's people don't necessarily have to die. People don't necessarily have to be killed per se. And I do, by the way, I know this is supposed to be the what's not working theme, but I do really love the idea. I love the concept of this story. The idea of it being surrounding one event, and then the two different perspectives on it. It's very small in scope, and that's kind of cool. I think that's actually not even kind of, that's really cool. So yeah, I love that. But yeah, I think adding more context as far as the genre, giving me more signposts the way that you did, I would do more of that with main character as well as other characters. Again, I don't know if any of the other characters are strange or have strange issues or not, but if they do, give me some. You don't have to like throw it out into the open and, you know, rip back the curtain and expose all the spoilers, but you can give me some subtle clues that make it. I think that there's nothing more exciting than when you read something and then by the time you get to the end, you're like, I should have seen that coming. Like it was inevitable, but still surprising. So when you show me characters that are showing me things that don't quite make sense in the moment, but if I keep reading and I start to figure it out, oh no, that's why they were, that's why Lou was, twitching like that or whatever. Like that kind of thing would be helpful as far as the genre goes. So yeah, I would say that. The third thing was the protagonist herself. Now, the thing about Serena for me was I couldn't figure out, was Serena, at first I thought Serena was a sociopath. And I was like, okay, is she supposed to be a sociopath? And the reason why I thought this was because there was a specific line you used where you were saying she was like mimicking her mom's reaction to her, or something like that.
Her smile?
Yeah, the mimicking back the smile. And I was like trying to figure out, does she just not have emotions, and so she has to kind of pull from other people to kind of gauge how she should or should not feel, which would be totally cool if that's the case. I think that's awesome.
More trying to like dive into their differences, like her dimples, and so I was just trying to like build the way she looks, basically.
Kind of
Okay.
like the contrast of diving into like something's off. She doesn't look like her mom. Kind of
Yeah.
like that.
Gotcha. Okay. So for me, that didn't come across. I didn't pick that up. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Jaylon is far more perceptible when it comes to this kind of stuff than I am, and Charles is the wizard of the gang. So these far smarter folks than me might have grabbed it than I do. But for us dumb readers, I didn't grab it. So I didn't grab it. And that's okay. I'm totally cool with that. But I say all that to say that as a character, emotionally, she felt a little flat to me. And not in the way that not in a way that earns the reader's investment. Like sometimes there are characters that feel like they don't have any, for instance, like Dexter, for instance. Dexter's a wonderful example of a character that Dexter is a sociopath, so it's kind of different. But you have a character that feels like emotionally they're a little bit emotionally unavailable. She feels like she's an emotionally unavailable character to an extent. I realized she wasn't sociopathic, by the way, when I realized that she felt guilty about the way that her mom lying to her mom and all that. The fact that she felt guilty about it told me, okay, she's not a sociopath. However, I would say that I wanted to root for Serena, but I couldn't.
I didn't want people to root for her. I want her to be like morally gray. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please.
I wanted her to be like this complicated character that you don't know if you really like her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's totally fine, because that's how I felt. So then you won.
Okay,
Yeah, I was
great.
gonna say, like, I feel like you would put this under like what's working instead of what's not working if you did skip ahead and read like I did, just because like you do find out, not to spoil it, but you do find out that she's got both those sides in her, both the
The good
emotion,
and yeah.
both the emotional human one and the emotionally unavailable evil one.
Yeah, because
Okay,
it's
that's fair.
just all about dealing with that darker self of you inside of you.
So in that sense, then fair. That's fair. It could totally be something that's working. Again, in 10,000 words, it didn't come across that way. Whether that be we introduced that idea earlier, or you just kind of have to lose some people that are reading it, the ones that are like, I'm only giving this X amount of pages and then I'm done. And that's okay too, because that's not your audience. So let them fall off where they need to. But the other thing that felt weird to me about Serena is I couldn't get a sense of what she wanted, like as a goal, other than, just to kind of not upset her mom and not rock the boat with things, and just kind of going with the flow felt like what she wanted. But even in that, it didn't feel like a strong enough goal for a character. And one of the things that I think is really important to do is establish what your characters want, and it's allowed for that to change. So a character could want one thing for the first 10 or 15 pages of a book, and they may want ice cream, they may want whatever, and then by the end, then once the actual point of no return happens, suddenly they want something new, because it becomes something more important becomes clear. To me, it felt like Zarina was very aimless in what she wanted. She was just more of a, not aimless, I would say more reactive, in the sense that she was just kind of it felt like she was more of a tag along. Even though the story was from her perspective, it just felt like she was kind of going along.
I was going for that too, where like she doesn't really have a choice in any of this, and she's just
I think that all of these suggestions are kind of pointing to, if you introduce the core conflict sooner, then people will get more behind understanding how they should feel about this character, or how they should view different parts, that again, like, you were going for it, it was meant to come across that way, and it won't be a problem. People will latch on to that if you do introduce that core conflict a little bit sooner, whether that be like through one sentence or whether that be letting that point of no return in the murder happen a little bit sooner. I feel like that alone will solve a lot of these littler things with, like, how should this character feel to me? How should I read these different details that you're letting me glimpse about her?
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that because like I said, if a lot of this is answered later, then we need to answer it sooner, or start out with it and then give us glimpses of it. It doesn't have to be fully explained and fully exposed immediately.
So,
But just show me that, like, if you want her to feel like she's out of control and that everything's out of her control and she's kind of just being dragged along through everything, that's totally fine. And I think that works. I think in some ways that makes her incredibly relatable if you do that. I think that there has to be a way, though, to still create a level of agency in her, as opposed to, because I mean, I think realistically speaking, when you're dealing with a character who's going to be the hero of your story and you're going to want you want us to stick with that character for 400 pages or more, I want to know that even if they're being dragged against their will to do something, they're gonna fight back in some way, even if it's small acts of rebellion. Whether it's, I'm gonna, like, the fact that she did what she did with the pills, that was great. That's a solid form of rebellion from the greater thing. Do more of that, because I think that lets me see, okay, this is a character who's not just reacting to everything that's happening around them. They're taking action in their life. And then also, like I said, give her a goal, give her something that she actively wants. It could be just she wants to make it through the first day of school without losing her shit, or whatever it may be. That's what she wants to do, and she's just kind of freaking out about how she's going to make that happen. Now I'm locked in on this. Now I'm excited, because I'm like, okay, I want to see if she's going to make it through the first day. Literally, oddly enough, I read 10,090 words. So the last thing I read was one of the more exciting parts of the story, which she runs into the kid in school in the cafeteria. And he's like, and she explains that she's a junior, and he's like, I don't give a fuck. That was literally the last line that I read. So I was like, I should read more. This is exciting. Now somebody's gonna get hit. No, but I think that creating that scene right there within itself, if the goal for her is something like, I want to just make it through the first day, I just have to make it through one day. And I can imagine, I wasn't homeschooled, so I don't know, but I do know that I know what it was like to go to school on the first day of school, being at a new school. I remember counting how many days of school were in the school year, and I knew it. And so when I started the new school and I knew how many days I had to go, I was like, today is day one of whatever. And I just need to get through this one and mark an X on the calendar, and that's that. That within itself is a relatable thing that a lot of people can relate to. Whether they like you or not, everybody can understand that. And that gives her a level of goal. Not to say that you have to use this, but this is just an example of giving her something small that lets us sit with her and be willing to go the road with her. And so the bigger conflict happens and the more interesting stuff begins to happen. It just gives us something to kind of entertain us a little bit. Does that make sense?
You started to ask a question, Rose. I wanted to make sure you got to.
I wanted, like, to make Serena seem like a character that just gets constantly dragged through anything. Like, even with Lorenzo, like, he's just immediately assorting, like, you're gonna do this for me because I said so. And she's like, okay. And so I wanted that sort of thing, but also where she just slowly kind of builds this stubbornness where she's like, okay, I'm not doing this, and I'm lying about this now, and I'm lying about that. So, and I want it to build slowly. But I get where you're coming from, where I might need to put that in the first few chapters because I don't want to lose readers, but I definitely get where you're coming from.
I see what you're saying about the wanting to build the slow resistance to learning to kind of get a backbone and do your own thing, and not just wanting to be like, she immediately just does that. She just immediately stops. And this is why I say I think small rebellions might be interesting, because when people do develop, there's almost no one that is a complete and utter pushover. There are a lot of people who say that they are, but we all have our limits. We all have little things that we do. There might even just be micro things that we do that rebel against when people tell us what to do. I think humans by nature are naturally anti-authority. I think that even people who comply in advance are naturally anti-authority. And I think that because of that, they tend to resist in small ways, whether it's, like I said, from even the not taking the pills thing or taking, not doing it the way she's supposed to. Actually a leap for rebellion within itself. But I mean, even a small thing of like when I forget her name, the one that was kind of annoying.
Rivery?
Yeah, her. When she gives her the drink and Serena just drinks it immediately. That right there was like, I get where you now when you say what you're saying now, I get where you're coming from, because like in my mind I'm like, you just took that and you're just gonna drink it, and then she didn't really tell you what's in it or anything. You're just gonna be like, sure, yeah, I'll drink it, whatever. So like even in something like that, if it's an act of like wiping the lip of the thing off just so that she doesn't touch her mouth doesn't touch the same thing that Reveries did, something so small and minute that anybody else might consider just a micro thing that people do, that's a small little seed of rebellion that you're planting, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes until finally it becomes absolutely noticeable that she is a completely different person, or not different person, but she's stronger or is more defiant. But just small little things like that, I think that would be a really good way of just giving us a sign that that's what she's going to become. Show me a glimpse of what she can be, so that I can, whether I want to root for her completely or not, I can at the very least be willing to see where she ends up and want to know. Show me what she can be so I can believe in the change when it happens. So that's what I would say about that. And then, like I said, giving her a goal, I think early is also kind of important to just give us something to follow, not root for, but just to follow.
My goal for her was just all about her mother. That's all she really cares about. That's why she is making friends. That's why she's trying to be normal. So
Okay.
that was the initial goal.
I was going to ask something about that. I was going to make a statement and ask you if it was true. This is kind of going into our next section, which is talking about the core theme of your story. Because what Jared is saying is really just take those threads that are through lines in your story that everything hinges on, which is the definition of your theme, and give them an anchor to tie into in the beginning. So my question was going to be, for her goal, I mean, as it was stated, she says she wanted to be a good daughter. If that's her goal, then as someone who, again, skipped ahead a little bit and read a little bit more, that's a really great conflict, because you have someone whose goal is to be good, is to be entirely centered around someone else that they love, and then like they find out their core conflict that they have to fight against is realizing that they have this very dark nature that's just intrinsic in them.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to fight that in order to reach their goal, or how their goal has to change in light of that. So again, like it's already there. Like you already have it in your story if that's the case.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like even at the end of it, that's her same goal. It's the title though. She just wants to be a being of love. That's why I put that quote up, where you just everything you do in love,
Yep. So yeah, like again, you have those different threads there. You just have to anchor them in something a little bit sooner so that people can follow that through line throughout your entire book. It makes the entire story feel stronger, more cohesive when you anchor those threads. So yeah, that's more like where all these suggestions are coming from.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with she's absolutely right about that. I think that it's all here. I think it just needs to be pulled up a little and made a little bit more clear. I do think that the being a good daughter goal is good. I think it's a good start. I don't think that it's strong enough on its own, because I think the questions I would ask is, what exactly is a good daughter? And why exactly do you want to be a good daughter? Is there someone that you were trying to contrast against? Was your mom kind of a rebellious child, and so she's super overprotective now and doesn't want you to be like her, and so you're trying to actively avoid being like her? Is there, I don't know, do you have a cousin that's like the black sheep of the family, and you're just actively trying to be contrast from that person? I want to know, because it's not that being a good daughter is not good. It's being a good daughter is vague. It's a vague goal. And and at what point do we know that they've achieved this goal? What point do we know that she's been a good daughter? What does she have to do to be considered a good daughter? And that's why I think you want to give her a goal that has a clear metrics that we can track as a reader and say, okay, that's why I said get through one day of school. That's the trackable thing. When the school day's over, we know that she's done that. Being a good daughter is something she would have to be for ever, or at least until she's like 18 and out on her own. And I don't know how long the story's gonna be, but if that's not where we're going, keep that, but focus it even more on what that might mean, or what being a good daughter looks like, and then whatever that is, hyperfixate on one of those, and then let that be kind of her measurable goal that she has that we can keep track of and know. And again, that goal doesn't have to be the permanent goal of the book. It just gets us to some of the other stuff, especially if you're gonna have a slower start and it's gonna be a slow burn at the beginning. Giving us something that we can track that keeps us entertained, that we're watching and seeing and whatever. Then when that other bigger event happens, the more important stuff happens, it's like, okay, cool. It'll be even better if that big event is somehow clashing against this idea of what she thinks she wants to be or whatever her goal is. So in this case, we talk about she wants to be a good daughter. If the big event is going to be something that has her being anything but a good daughter, then that it hits because it works. It's like, oh, okay. We fell into this world that we thought we were supposed to be in. We thought this is the way things are supposed to be. And then you do my favorite thing. You punch the reader in the face. And that is exactly what you're supposed to do. So yeah, give her a trackable, be a good daughter thing. Like I said, keep that. I think that's great. Just focus in a little bit more on it and give us a more clear picture of what being a good daughter might mean for her, and how and how we can make that measurable and entertain us for the slow burn that you've got going for it, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
The other thing that I noticed, and this is more of a nitpicky thing really, but I felt like the dialogue was too clean. The dialogue felt polished for me. And here's the thing. I didn't read ahead, so maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe everybody's Stepford Wives for a reason. But to me, it just felt like, oh, well, everybody's so not polite, because not everyone was necessarily nice to each other, but it just felt like the conversation didn't feel natural. When I was reading it, I was like, people don't really talk like this. People don't communicate like that.
Was it with Evelyn?
It wasn't just with Evelyn. It was just generally across
Okay.
the only one who I think I felt like their dialogue was the stronger of all was probably the protagonist, and that's simply just because it was already from her point of view. So when she did talk, you already had her voice, and you already knew how she would talk and what she would say. So that makes sense why that would be the stronger one. What I would say is that it's a really fine line to walk with dialogue, because with dialogue, you can't do all the things that we do in real conversations. So the stutter stops and the uhs and ums and all those other things, you don't really have to do all of that in dialogue. But at the same time, it's not always this perfect communication either, where everybody's saying exactly what they want to say, or how they want to say it. People screw up. People talk around what they're trying to say. There's a lot of that, and dialogue is a tricky thing for a lot of people. So I understand. I always say, no matter what draft you're on, once you're done, read it out loud, or better yet, if you can get one of those things where it's read back to you and just sort of listen to how it sounds, and then kind of compare how it sounds to actual conversations. And sometimes it's simply just about changing words, not necessarily giving people accents, but just particularly sometimes some people have specific dialects, or they have different ways of saying things, or certain words that they say differently. Like I have friends that pronounce, this is not great, but I have a friend who pronounces ask like he says axe all the time. Like that, like those kinds of things. That's stuff that people do, and in doing that and throwing those little subtle things in it, it elevates the dialogue so much. And I wouldn't worry about it until your last draft. Like, let dialogue kind of be the last thing you really worry about. So like when you're ready, right before you send it out to your beta readers and you start doing all that, then go back through it and focus only on the dialogue and just say, is there a way that I can elevate this and make it sound better? Is there a way that I can make this sound more like a real conversation than it does? And if you can't, that's totally fine. That's what editors are for. They can help you to sort of tighten it up, or say, it might sound better if we said it like this, that kind of thing. But just give it a try. I wouldn't stress about it right now. just keep that in mind as a thing to work on. I always think that less is more when it comes to dialogue. So if you can find ways for people to say things without actually saying them, whether it be actual words or body language, go with it. I have a writing coach who's tells me that his favorite writer is the writer that comes to him with a book that's manuscript that's blocks of text and very little dialogue, because they've done it all with body language and things like that. That's not to say you have to do that. I'm just saying less is more sometimes when it comes to dialogue, because the more people are talking, clearly right now you'll see, the more complicated it gets. Yeah, that's my final thought as far as that goes. One last thing, and this is also a nitpicky thing. There were a lot of parts in here where it did feel like, while I do think you are a fantastic writer, there were a lot of parts where it did feel like it was more telling us than showing us certain things. And I don't know if you may have done that on purpose. That may have been the way that it was meant to be. And if that's the case, then disregard this completely.
Okay.
But if not, just be mindful of the moments of how you describe what's happening, as opposed to she felt this. Show me what she felt. Show me how she felt. And in a lot of ways you did do that. There was some stuff that you did. Like I said, it wasn't a consistent thing throughout the thing. There were just moments where it was like, she could have shown me that more than she could have told me. But I know that you understand the concept because you did do it throughout the work.
Case in point, more of her fingers occasionally twitched on the steering wheel and her brows would furrow in momentary contemplation.
More of that, because that's fantastic. That's really, really good. So yeah, those were all of my thoughts. I know it was a lot that I threw at you.
No, I appreciate it, really. This is really helping me.
Good, I'm glad. So I will say, with all of that, before we jump into themes and all of that part of things, do you have any questions that we could answer for you based off of the stuff we talked about?
I think you've answered everything. Because I did have questions about how you felt about the beginning, because I always struggle with the beginnings. I always don't know where to put everything, because a lot of times when I'm writing, it's just I write one paragraph and then I write the next chapter and it's just all over the place.
That is how I write too, and I also struggle with beginnings.
Yeah, it's really hard.
It
is, and I agree with that. I think so. Beginnings for me is always about, again, it's always about how can I punch my reader in the face as fast as possible. That's how I always think about beginnings. So I try and again, this is not meant to be a plug, I promise you. It's just examples. But in My Sister's Keeper, we start off with our main character breaking into a store, committing a crime. And I remember that when I first started writing it, I struggled for weeks trying to figure out, how do I start this story? I started in so many different places and couldn't figure out how to do it. And because I don't want it to come off as like I'm trying to tell you everything about the world in one go. And I don't, there's so much information for you to know and I can't give it to you. So I just kind of figure out the first thing I have to do is, when you step into a room with a bunch of people, right? And they're all engaged in all of their own conversation, their own thing, you have to think about, what is the one thing I can say that can get everybody to pay attention to me in this moment. And when you're writing a book, it's the same way. Everybody is scrolling on TikTok and on Instagram, and they're doing all this. When they sit down and they give you a few moments of their time to read your book, what's the one thing I can say that tells them, don't pick up your phone? Or if they're on their phone because they're using a Kindle, don't exit this app and go into what other app. What's the thing you can do to that? And just start there. And then you can always dial it back. Like I said, if it's crazy, insane, and you just start off with people blown up and body parts flying, that may not be the greatest way to start. But in your first draft, for sure, start off with the main character dying. It doesn't matter. Just, start off in something that's going to make, what would make me stop doing everything else and just gotta read that. And then scale it back so that it lines up with the kind of story you're trying to tell. But just don't be afraid. I would say don't be afraid to shock people, or don't be afraid to grab people by the neck and say, pay attention to me.
Okay.
It's okay to ask for attention when you're an author. That's totally fine. It's kind of what we do.
Leading us into this conversation about what the core theme is.
Yes.
A big thing that will grab people's attention and let them know you need to pay attention because this is important is anchoring those threads of what your core theme is going to be, because that's That's the big message that you're writing this entire book for. So making sure that that's right at the front, right at the beginning of your book, is going to give people the message, oh, this is going to be something really important that I should pay attention to. So even more than the shock value, give them something meaningful that they can really latch onto that says, this is going to be explored, this is going to be discussed in this book, and it's important for you, so pay attention.
I agree. Was those your thoughts, or did you have other thoughts?
I do have other thoughts.
Okay.
All of them came from pretty much the end of the sample that you gave us that was more than 10,000 words. So it was like
Oh,
at the
sorry. I didn't
No,
know
it's okay.
that docs like can show you.
No, you're good. I totally I liked having the whole thing because again, like, you know, we say we only have the time to read 10,000 words for these free audit sessions, but again, like it was an engaging enough story. I wanted to read more. So I did like skim through the rest, and I didn't take notes on it, but like I skimmed through the rest.
Okay.
So most of these notes about the theme that I picked up as being the central message of your book came from some of that later scene, that point of no return, where I realized what the bigger thing was that was the core conflict. So I'm curious to see what Jared picked up and if it's similar. But I feel like, again, like you can anchor some of these threads a little bit sooner, and then someone who has only spent a few minutes with your book will still see it. But I saw a very timely and important theme to explore come out. And I think that you very, very poignantly pointed out we live in a world that forces us to be as cold and hard as it is for our survival, but that duality of, in order to experience the beauty and joy of our humanity, we need to be soft. We need to be beings of love. We need to love gently. But we also need to be stronger than evil. Your main character, Serena, has to learn how to balance these two sides of her being. And while she has to answer these questions in her fictional story, I can see how you're very meaningfully inviting readers to answer those questions in their own lives. You know, how do we get to choose how we experience life when we don't get to choose how dark our existence is? What do we have power to change about our being, and what is beyond our control? Those are the questions that are very timely and important for people to answer. And I think that if you give us a hint, pose those questions a little bit sooner, again, readers are going to realize like this is an important story to pay attention to because it's saying something bigger. It's not just entertaining. It's saying something deeper. And that's why we tell stories, because they can deliver these very deep, important, timely truths in a way that is relatable to people and connects with them deeply.
That was beautifully said.
I'm glad that I had the opportunity to pick up on those things. I hope that that's
Yes,
like,
you did well. Like I
okay.
didn't I'm never sure if I'm getting my message across well, but I'm so glad that you picked up on that message. So
Yeah, you put it in well.
You did a good job with that. The thing about themes in general, and I think we just had this in the group chat conversation a while ago about interpretation. Whether or not you feel like you've gotten your message through or not, know that people are always going to interpret it however they want to, and that's totally fine. You as the artist created the thing for the reasons why you wanted to create it, and some people are going to pick that up and some people won't. But I think you did layer it based on what Jalen was saying. I picked up on those things as well. I had a list of 20 thematic things that came up, but I narrowed it down to, don't worry, I'm not gonna make you hear all 20, but I narrowed it down to at least 6 that really stuck with me. So for me, it was the burden and bond of being someone else's everything. It felt like kind of a story about codependency a little bit.
yeah.
And the and how, what's the burden that carries when you are in those kinds of relationships. Because a lot of times we think about being the person who is, and sometimes codependency, most of the time codependency is two people that are both kind of so entangled in one another. And in this case, I think that the mother-daughter relationship is very much a codependent relationship, because you have the daughter who is trying so hard to be what her mother wants her to be, and then the mother who's just so wrapped up in her daughter's well-being, what her daughter's doing, how she's doing it. And we don't often talk about how sometimes the person who's less tangled up than the other, the burden that they carried for being in that attachment type relationship. And I think that this is a great window into that. The other thing was growing up under a parent's fear and learning how to exist outside of it. That one struck me hard because I grew up in a situation, I grew up with a very religious mother, and my mom made it very clear to me that when I was old enough to understand things, that when you have a child, that you are basically pulling a piece of yourself out of yourself and letting it walk around in the world. And so you have to be overly paranoid about what's going to happen to that little piece of you forever. My mother still thinks that about me, and I'm 37. But
Well, it never
understanding
ends.
it doesn't. And so, and recognizing that, growing up under that, and living in a world where, living in a home where your mother is, or father, or whoever is afraid for you all the time in the home, and then having to kind of live in that world outside of it, and knowing that that's kind of the umbrella that's over your head the entire time, that's a hard burden to carry. And I think that that's something that's touched on here that's really, really helpful. Bodily alienation and transformation was also really important. I think that's something that I picked up on. I think it's kind of an important topic to be had. Bodily autonomy in general, I think, is an important conversation that's happening in the world right now. But the idea of feeling alienated from your own body is a scary thing. And I feel like Serena in a lot of ways is dealing with that, metaphorically and literally in the story. And it really popped out to me as well. Another thing that popped out to me was wanting to disappear versus wanting to be seen. Again, these were things, I think a lot of times the way that we interpret art is based on our own baggage. So everything that I interpreted was purely just from like my screwed up brain, and was just like, oh yeah, that's me. Okay, cool. She wrote that about me. That's what she did. I appreciate that. But no, you made me feel seen with the type of conversations you're starting or having in this story. And that's definitely one of them. And the last thing that I stumbled my way through was learning to feel safe in a world that does not feel safe to begin with. And I think that that's especially important in a coming of age type of story. This being, and I don't know, I always feel like when the protagonist is a teenager, it's coming of age.
Yeah.
So this, even though it is dark fantasy and all that other stuff, it's still kind of a coming of age story and learning how to figure out how to be safe in the world. Also, a thing that I've noticed is, she's also a woman. So there's a level of, this is something I've recently not discovered, I knew it all along, but I've taken more into consideration lately, is the realization that women in general have a very different fight in the world than guys do, in the sense of like how you carry yourself and where you walk or where you go or when you can go there. And I think that there's something kind of interesting about a female protagonist in dark fantasy, because in the real world, the world is not always very nice to women, and it's not always a safe place for women. Then you throw in it monsters and other scary shit, and it becomes even more compelling. That's more of a tangent of like why there's so many female protagonists in these genres. It makes more sense as to they're the ultimate underdog in these types of situations. This character specifically, though, I felt a level of empathy for Serena, and that may not have been your intention, considering that you wanted her to be kind of a morally gray character, but I did feel a level of empathy for her, and the struggle that she deals with, both from a real world perspective as well as the story stakes that are currently laid out, of just kind of trying to fit in a world that's operating differently than you operate. And then within that, there's a level of feeling unsafe. I'm constantly feeling like I'm in situations, and I'm not a woman, but I'm constantly feeling I'm in situations where I have to operate in a way that the rest of the world just doesn't operate. And that makes me feel incredibly unsafe a lot of the time. And so that level of empathy is what I connected to Serena, in the sense of like, I can imagine being in the circumstances that she's in and trying to stand up tall and do what you need to do to be the person your mother wants you to be, but also kind of functioning outside of your safe space of like being home and having to deal with other people and their opinions and them shoving unidentified drinks in your face and asking you to drink it. The craziness of this kind of world. So yeah, that's what I pulled from it. And I don't know if any of that resonated with you, but yeah, that's what I pulled from it.
I do touch up on that, how dangerous it is to be a woman in the future chapters, because I'm going to be honest with you, it was really hard to write those, like, because it's so personal. it was really hard to write those and just have people read that. Like I still like I cried writing it, and I still can't bring myself to completely read it all the time, but I do touch up on that. So I'm glad that you got that, and I appreciate you empathizing with that, even though it wasn't my goal.
I applaud you even more for writing something that is so meaningful that it was a challenge for you to write. And I think that, again, that's just even more proof that this story is something bigger. There is something important and meaningful to this story. And there's a reason why you've been given these dreams and nightmares to then explore this conversation that other people need to experience as well.
Agreed. Agreed. So, with all of that said, we'll do final thoughts on the story, the overall takeaway that we had. Any final thoughts that you have, Rose, about your story, about what you want future readers to know about this, the perspective that you want them to have, anything. We can start with your perspective, or we can start with ours, whichever works best for you.
I think I want to start with yours first.
Okay, totally. Jalen, you can go first.
I was gonna say, I think that kind of was my final thoughts. Just I can feel, I see, and talking with you, I've really appreciated the way that you've confirmed it, but I could see how meaningful this story was. And again, it's a very timely conversation to have. And I think that this story is a beautiful way to open up that conversation that invites other people to enter into it.
I agree. I think the final thing I would say is that everything that you need, like Jalen said, everything that you need is in the story already. It's already there. I think it's just about getting focused and maybe moving things around a little bit or adjusting them a little, just so that it becomes a little bit more clear. But overall, it's already there. I want to say that beyond just applauding you for being brave enough to show up and be here and, take the beating, so to speak, you are a brave soul, and I truly do appreciate your story. There's one thing that I will say that's in this, that no matter what genre you prefer or what kind of style you prefer, that I did feel and did recognize, is your soul is in this. And it's a beautiful soul that you shared with us. And the thing I love about this show is when we read these things, it does give us a chance to not just read good stories, but it helps us to really understand the person that wrote it. And so I thank you for sharing this part of yourself with us, letting us know you, letting us share the space with you, and telling us your story. Because this is, as I always say, story is the connective tissue of civilization. And so this is your part. This is the piece that you are adding to civilization. And so I have no doubt that this is going to become a published work, and it's going to be out in the world. And I think that you're going to contribute to the widespread canon of human existence. And so, yeah, this was awesome. I enjoyed it. And thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for being brave, and thank you for taking a chance on us. That was brave of you.
Thank
you. I can't say that enough.
I really appreciate this. This was like a whole, like a spur of the moment sort of thing when I decided to publish and just reach out and look for readers. So I really appreciate this. I'm glad that you guys got the message, because I always panic about that.
You did good.
Thank you.
Do you want to let our listeners know where they can find you and follow along your writing?
Yeah, you can find my series on Wattpad. It's just Almighty Beings. You can either read Beings of Chaos or Beings of Love. They're both detailing the same events, just from different perspectives. And I'm currently working on publishing the next two books. So also you can find me on TikTok. It's called Rose 606 Thorne.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Very exciting.
Thank
you for being a guest. Thank you for being on the show. We're always here for you if you need any further help or anything like that. And as for the listeners themselves, as always, if you want us to talk about your story, you want to share it with us, definitely reach out. We have a whole form that you can fill out. We're making some tweaks in the near future, as to the kind of guests that we will have on here, but we will always have space for our fiction writers and the kinds of stories that we tell. Please know that if you have a fiction story, no matter what kind of, if you're hearing this later after we've announced the changes that we're making, please know that even if you have written fiction, you're still more than welcome, and we'll still be willing to sit down with you and talk about your story and how we can help you shape it into the thing that you want it to be. Other than that, Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.